All right, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started here. So welcome to the December 2025 Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council meeting. My name is Joe Semino. I'm the current chair. I'm going to be turning it over to the regional administrator. We are doing an off-cycle swearing in for a council member. So I will turn it over now to Mike Pentney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could ask Lori Nolan to stand up and turn her mic on and join along with me, as I'm sure she has this memorized. She's done it a number of times, but very happy to be able to swear in Lori Nolan as our newest council member. So we'll just read along with me. And so
Sounds good.
I,
Lori Nolan,
as a duly appointed member of a regional fishery management council established under the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act, hereby promise to conserve and manage the living marine resources of the United States of America by carrying out the business of the council for the greatest overall benefit of the nation. I recognize my responsibility to serve as a knowledgeable and experienced trustee of the nation's marine fisheries resources, being careful to balance competing private or regional interests, and always aware and protective of the public interest in those resources. I commit myself to uphold provisions, standards, and requirements of the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act and other applicable law, and shall conduct myself at all times according to the rules of conduct prescribed by the Secretary of Commerce. This oath is given freely and without mental reservation or purpose of evasion. Thank you. Congratulations.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just say, this is my 7th time, as Mike pointed out, being sworn in. And I just wanted to say that this was the longest appointment process that I've ever gone through of the 7. And I just wanted to thank those who supported me and hung in to make this happen, because it was long and hard. And I just want to say it's nice to be back, and thank you.
Yeah, well, Lori, I think congratulations are in order, but also we want to thank you for taking the time to serve again with us and provide your expertise. Really appreciate it. I'm going to go to Chris for a quick announcement, and then we will start our agenda with the Jason Didden show.
Yeah, well, I won't take too long. I know everyone's waiting anxiously for Jason. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to DC. Hopefully you got my email that said today is picture day. So we're going to take our annual council photo. We're going to do that right before lunch. So if you're a council member, please just stay here when we break. Mary is scouting a location. So once we have that location, I'll tell you exactly where to go. We'll get that photo done relatively quickly, right before lunch. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So without further ado, our first agenda item is the Atlantic Mackerel Framework, including rebuilding and specifications, and the Shad River Herring Cap. And we'll go to Jason. Thank you.
Thank you for the intro. Just a few abbreviations for folks who happen upon this presentation later. I think most of you all know those. So kind of 4 components here. Going to roll through the assessment and the SSC report. Dr. Rago is online. Those would be brief. Go through the highlights of the River Herring and Shad update, and we have advisory panel, had advisory panel meetings from both mackerel, squid, butterfish, and River Herring and Shad. Also flag some recent public comments. Then briefly review the alternative sets, and then get into the committee recommendations. So we had a new assessment in 2025. There have been plans for adding a bunch of bells and whistles, but because of delays in getting the key egg survey in, it's basically the exact same as last time, and kind of similar to the pattern across the time series here. We appear to have had a recruitment spike right at the end, and if you projected forward one more year, the projections would suggest, because of that recruitment, right now the stock is fully rebuilt. But that bottom right-hand corner, that's the estimated recruitment for the assessment. And you can see it's quite high there. And if you look at the other highlighted recruitments there, our terminal year recruitments have a history of being revised down once we get more data, once we see those fish a few more years as older fish each year. There's an age structured assessment. So we're looking at those fish each year as an age class as they get older and older. And we've seen 20, 30, 60% reductions as a range for those other highlighted terminal years. And because of that, there's a lot of uncertainty on that terminal year assessment. The SSC dug into that substantially, and I'll turn it to Dr. Paul Rago for a summary of the SSC meeting on this.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, we had a two-part process. Next slide, please. For part one, of course, was prior to the federal shutdown. There was discussion of the assessment and key projections, and or I guess this is more during the federal shutdown. The SSC had a very thorough discussion of the assessment and the key projections that had been completed. We agreed on a revised methodology, but not the final estimates. And then our intention was, of course, to make this open. We wanted all aspects to be discussed in plenary and to preserve that record so that there will be no surprises. After the shutdown ended, the projections were revised by per the recommendations that the SSC, and I'll talk about what those recommendations were. We simply affirmed the computations that had been previously recommended, and then we made no other changes to the SSC report. And so that was the idea, was to preserve what had been done in plenary and make sure that that was conveyed as part of the decision. So we did not look at the results before we saw them, but we did agree to a process. And just a special thanks to both Jason Didden and to Kirsten Curdy at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center for their really excellent work in terms of ensuring that this thing went as smoothly as possible. Next slide, please. Some of the key scientific points are listed in the next two slides. Jason has already mentioned that estimates of recruitment in the stock have consistently decreased over assessments as more information becomes available. As Jason noted, this is an age-structured assessment, and you get several different looks at the stock as it ages. In the past, these subsequent looks, so to speak, have indicated that those very strong year classes typically have not been as strong as previously thought. So we really only have one piece of information, one look at the 2024 recruitment, and it's very large and highly uncertain, the model estimates suggest. So there are a variety of ways to address issues like this. And the SSC report goes through a lot of those considerations. And although it was only a one topic SSC meeting, we managed to generate 20 pages worth of documentation on it. So I'd urge you to read that and try to get the sense of the full considerations that were made there. But we really wanted to avoid doing too much surgery on the stock assessment model itself. And so the rationale we came up, next slide, please, We agreed that the use of the median from the recent time series is probably the best estimate of the 2024 recruitment. Now best should probably be in quotation marks. It is sort of considered or expert judgment of the SSC as a whole that felt this was appropriate. We also retained the previously defined OFL-CV of 100%. We felt that this was more of a special circumstance and really wasn't something that would push the uncertainty boundary to a higher level. That means, we were comfortable, retaining that and not making a special case for this particular scenario. And then finally, the OFL that that is ultimately chosen really depends upon this dichotomy, so to speak, between the P-star method, which is the council's current risk policy, or a rebuilding approach, which is circumscribed by national guidelines, and those allow for slightly different trajectories toward rebuilding. There are an infinite number of possible trajectories for any rebuilding program. We're looking at three of them in this particular instance. And finally, the SSC did not recommend continuation of the 2025 ABC of 3,200 metric tons. So next slide, please. So the feasible rebuilding scenarios are consistent with, one, the council's risk policy, the national standard guidelines specified in federal guidance, and then we have and it's also consistent with our explicit recommendation for the estimation of stock status, the initial condition, so to speak, for 2025. That leads to determination of an overfishing limit for 2026, and then a series of alternative quotas. And Jason will go into the specific numbers on these in a moment. But for 2026, they range from 10,700 metric tons for the P-star, the current policy or the standard risk policy of the councils, and they go higher for the alternative rebuilding strategies, which are conditioned on a fixed F, and the F is lower, and when the F is lower, the probability of recovery becomes higher. When the F is higher, the opposite is true. There's a lower probability, and the upper bound on that is the 51% probability of recovery. That corresponds to a fixed fishing mortality rate and fixed selectivity patterns corresponding to an F of 0.15. So Jason will give a lot more details on this. Next slide, please. There's a long list of uncertainties associated with the assessment. I've just got the short list here. First being that the projections have not been reliable in the recent recovery period, generally overly optimistic. We mentioned the 2024 estimate being high and uncertain, and also this consistent pattern that many strong year classes have not shown up as expected. The age structure overall remains highly truncated. This is, of course, an issue. And the diagnostics, as highlighted in the assessment reports, suggest some additional unaccounted for mortality, namely predation. The next slide, please. There are some revisions to the recent Canadian landings, discarded bait, and particularly handline fisheries. And The management strategy evaluations conducted by the Department of Fisheries, Oceans, Canada suggest, a very high importance of these factors for rebuilding. So we did receive some public comment from one of the lead scientists from the DFO that I think was very helpful, and it kind of highlights the good cooperation between the service and the Department of Fisheries, Oceans on this particular assessment. There's really a high dependency on the information from DFO about the seasonality of spawning, and also the fecundity estimates. That is, how do you translate the size at a given age into expected number of eggs. The proportion in 2024 of U.S. eggs in the overall population was very high. This was a record of 81%, but it's in contrast to the Canadian assessment for the northern contingent, which suggests that the stock is depleted and it has continued low recruitment. Moreover, there's a fair amount of mixing between the contingents. So that is, again, this somewhat of a dichotomy between the perceived status of these two contingents. Next slide, please. There, of course, the follow-on to uncertainty is research recommendations. There's a very long list in the document. They highlight not only the most recent assessment, but recommendations from previous assessments as well. But one of the important ones is this fecundity and spawning phenology. That's the fancy word for timing. And it's basically that there are differences between the egg surveys and the two contingents, north and south, and so those can be problematic, and particularly in some years where maybe the timing isn't as previously hypothesized. There are likely age and time-dependent changes in natural mortality. Those are poorly understood and very difficult to actually tease out. There's some support for actually using more acoustic estimates for biomass and figuring out a way to synthesize more of that information. There are some important changes in selectivity, and these have not been fully evaluated. So selectivity referring to particularly the various fisheries, depending on inshore, offshore, small fish, larger fish, and so forth. There was a strong suggestion that more cooperative research to define real-time availability and the environmental drivers of that availability would be a useful adjunct, much as such collaborative work has been useful for some of the squid. And then finally, the usual recommendations, an increase in surveys, and particularly the monitoring of landings, so port sampling and discards via observers. So that's all I have, and I'll turn it back over to you, Jason. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So the kind of a quick summary of what happens there. Again, they decided that 2024 recruitment is unlikely to be that high. The replacement with that 09 to 23 median reduces that recruitment from about 1.3 billion to a little less than 0.1 billion fish, age ones in 2024. It's more than 90%. So that also means there are less age twos in 2025, age threes in 2026. That reduces the biomasses, reduces the ABCs to get rebuilt. So I was going to pause there. Dr. Kirsten Curdy, the assessment lead, is on. Also, we've got Paul here. So if there are any general assessment or SSC sciencey questions, I was going to pause here for a minute.
Okay, thank you, Jason and Paul. So questions for either on the presentation so far? Try and see hands. I see Michelle Duvall online. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, thanks. So thanks so much for the pause. And I guess Jason and Kirsten, just, knowing that the original plan was to transition to from ASAP to WAM, and understanding how changes in staffing and resources have led to modifications of the assessment schedule. When do you all anticipate that there might be another crack at this transition from ASAP to WAM? Thanks.
Yeah, I don't think any of us know that just yet. The center may have comment, but I know that's an ongoing issue of discussion of when and if that may occur.
Okay, thanks. Michelle, I'm not seeing any other hands to follow up on that. So I'll look. Are there any other questions around the table on the presentation to date? Jason, not seeing any.
Okay, I will continue. So next section, every other year we do a river herring and shad update to kind of support the setting of Atlantic mackerel specifications and potential changes to the river herring and shad cap. The report noted there are some limitations because of the shutdown on updating data. The monitoring committee confirmed its previous position, which has been the same since 2017, that with their not being able to, say this amount of alewife or blueback is, kind of biologically supportable for the coast, or this run, it's mostly a policy choice for the council of how much pressure does it want to put on the fishery to avoid river herring and shad. The cap operation hasn't really been relevant for the last couple of years with the low quotas. Really hasn't been that kind of historic directed mackerel fishing. There is some small scale fishing that goes on, but not the trip limits don't allow quote unquote cap trips to occur. Noted the most recent assessments for river herring and shad have noted that those species are depleted. The river herring assessment did explore adjusting the cap based on survey or run trends, and the review found that there was a useful exploration and worthy of further consideration, but it wasn't like a management recommendation to kind of go and use that immediately at this time. And then also flag as part of the Inflation Reduction Act funds, one of the early projects that the council funded was a river herring bycatch risk avoidance modeling. And we anticipate that come the start of the new year, they will be putting out kind of these voluntary maps of basically areas where there's either high probability, and it'll be weekly updates for the upcoming week, where there may be either high river herring abundance or the ratio of Atlantic mackerel or Atlantic herring to river herring may be poor. So they're getting ready to roll out that website, and that'll be available. And this first year, they're going to be collecting a lot of feedback from industry, both in terms of the display of the information, and do fishermen find that it matches what they see on the water. And they'll be working on that model through 2016, and hopefully have a second version of it in 2026, and then kind of like a new and improved version of it in 2027. Advisory panel highlights for mackerel, squid, butterfish. This is coming from their fishery performance report. They kind of flag there's good market demand. They expect higher prices given big expected cuts on the European side for Atlantic mackerel. They reported, they've seen areas of cooler water and bait that seems like it should be conducive to mackerel production. They also kind of noticed that north-south egg contribution differential, and they kind of observed that they thought maybe that indicates a shift towards U.S. waters production with a more higher contribution of U.S. eggs into that survey. They flag, they really haven't been able to direct on mackerel since late 2023, given the trip limits, again, at the larger scale trawling type fishing, and concern about river herring and shad closures just kind of popping in, not so much due to that the fishery may or may not be catching that amount of river herring and shad, but we've gotten some pretty low coverage in some years, and recommendations to modify observer placements. And that came up in the river herring and shad AP also, and I'll touch on that again. So they requested careful consideration of trade-offs with changing the trip limits. It's like, they would like for the quarter to last for the year, and there's impacts on the fishery if it closes early, and considering that with setting updated trip limits. A request to reestablish a research set aside. The quota is over 30,000 metric tons. This was really focused on some of that acoustics work that they've been they've done some preliminary work with the cooperative research folks on, and then recommending more research on acoustics has mostly been kind of just kind of some on the side kind of voluntary work on that acoustics. They'd like that to be more directly supported. And also there's definitely some interest on a minimum mesh size. We don't really have good studies on, we don't have studies that support a minimum mesh size for Atlantic mackerel. And there is some interest in industry in a minimum mesh size to try to release some small fish. There is, again, there's been not a lot of studies, and the closest study, it seemed like the mackerel were just plugging the net, so they really didn't see a selectivity gain from that, but there hasn't been a lot of work done on it. River herring and shad advisory panel highlights. We just had about half of the advisors on the call, but those who did attend concurred on two things. One, they recommended that the council should explore whether the standardized bycatch reporting methodology, the SBRM, that allocates observers could be modified to direct more observer coverage toward midwater trawl, given that's such a concern with river herring and shad. The center previously did a research project that, like, if river herring were in SBRM, would that direct more observer coverage to midwater trawl? And it ended up not. It just shuffled some other fleet, some groundfish, some mid-Atlantic small mesh trawl, I think. It shuffled some other observer around when you added in river herring to SBRM, but it didn't drive more observer coverage towards midwater trawl. I think probably mostly because midwater trawl retains most of the river herring and shad, and SBRM is just focused on discards. But they were interested, is there another way, just like, setting off the top some amount in a standardized fashion in the SBRM, higher coverage for midwater trawl. So they recommended exploration of that. And they also kind of, everyone, I think, begrudgingly, because they really want better data to judge any decision, that it seemed best is to leave the cap where it is at this point, notwithstanding a lot of concern either on folks who are focused on the river herring and shad runs themselves, or impact on industry from closures. Just making sure I didn't skip a slide here. Sorry. Okay. And that kind of tension, I think, gets to, like, the bycatch rates in Atlantic mackerel fishery are relatively low and lower than would typically generate concern, but 129 metric tons of river herring could still represent over 1 million fish. So it's like we have relatively low bycatch rates in this fishery, but still potentially, especially depending on how the fish, the river herring and shad, mix at sea, still potential impacts on river herring and shad despite the overall low bycatch rates. Also flag some recent public comments. These have been posted to the meeting page, and/or we also, I think, got a late comment just recently that's in the comment portal. So in general, those just summarizing some of them, either maintaining a higher rebuilding goal, like the 60% for mackerel, general concern about river herring and shad, and potentially lowering the river herring and shad cap versus what it is now. Some comments concern about quota usage by the lower mackerel tiers of the directed mackerel quota usage. Some comments that said a higher 50 fish for higher possession limit. We had a letter from Canada flagging their general concern about the uncertainty of the mackerel resource, and that they may revisit their quota next year if there's science to support it, and the U.S. increases its quota. And then Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts submitted a joint letter that they supported a uniform increase to 25 fish for recreational possession, citing concerns about administration and enforcement and estimate precision. I just want to flag there was one letter that was posted late but received earlier from IGFA that aligned to some of these issues here, the higher rebuilding goal and the concern about river herring and shad. It is posted on the website now, though. Okay, so I'll pause here for questions. And again, just we're gonna get into the alternatives and the committee recommendations, but any questions on the river herring and shad update or the advisory panel inputs before kind of get into the alternatives?
Looking to the council, any questions on either of those? Bobby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jason. Now, the question I had was on the river heron. I guess it's another iteration of the river heron bycatch avoidance program that we had a few years ago. Is that going to be just kind of like picked up where we left off, where you're going to utilize the daily catch reports for estimates of discards and interaction, or is this is this like an entirely new product where now you're going to be using different Marcos and different utilizing different equipment for reporting for the bycatch? And is it something that's going to be on a volunteer basis, or is it any vessel that is fishing within a hotspot area is going to be mandated to report?
Yeah, this is just designed as an informational tool to the fleet so that hopefully they can reduce their river herring and shad catch and not hit the cap, just voluntary. It's a totally different approach than the SMAS bycatch avoidance program, because that had a whole infrastructure built around it that went away. It was kind of, I think, may have been funded through Atlantic Herring RSA or something, but that funding, that program couldn't be maintained, does not exist now. And so, yeah, we don't have the resources to spin up that. There's no reporting from the fleet other than kind of some informal feedback, like, is this working, to the folks leading the project. It's really going to be color-coded maps of based on historically where we've seen kind of environmental conditions favorable to river herring and shad, and herring and mackerel, where you kind of most expect to see one or the other or both, based on presence, absence data coming out of the trawl survey time series and environmental data. So it's really, kind of a predictive tool for the fleet to try to help them avoid river herring and shad. And in that project, we talked about that SMAS, and that interactivity. I think maybe it moves towards that in the future, but don't have the infrastructure for that right now.
Thank you, Jason. I'm not seeing any other hands. I had a question. I share the concerns regarding observer coverage. So does memory serve correctly that when it comes time to calculate, we're talking about a handful of, I want to say that it's been as low as 2 or 3 observer trips when we're trying to calculate the cap. Is that correct?
Yes, in some years, and until they get to 5, GARFA has a methodology that blends prior year and current year data. So until they get to 5 trips, and sometimes they may not get to 5 trips, right? It's like a blended of current year and previous year data. And that can kind of, if the previous year was really low, that kind of keeps the cap low. If the previous year was observer trips were high, then you kind of start with a high ratio. So it can kind of just depend on what the previous year was, whether it's kind of pushing the cap up or pushing the cap down compared to the in-year current data.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands from council members. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to give the public a chance to ask questions on either what was presented for Atlantic mackerel or shad and river herring. So I'll look both online and in the room if there are any questions on the presentations. Not seeing any, Jason.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, just late hand. Lori, go ahead.
Sorry. Jason, I'm just wondering on the RSA, you touched on that, looking to get the RSA set at 3%. Is that going forward? Is that in place right now? I'm sorry, I'm a little behind on that. But and in that case, if the mesh size were going to be addressed, can it be addressed in this action, or that would come after an RSA project were to be developed?
So there is no RSA program right now, and I think to change that and reinstitute it would require substantial infrastructure, resource, council, GARFO changes. And traditionally, like we did a butterfish mesh change last year, or maybe this year or last year, to just to tweak it a little bit, but we had a research project that supported that. Generally, I think it'd be hard to just put in a mesh change without saying, okay, here's a study that says you know what's going to happen. So I think probably some folks would suggest, including the industry, you should just, bigger mesh, you should release some small fish, just do it. I think some folks would say it's probably a good research project to see if we can identify what the effect is and then do it. That's how I understand the situation. Okay. So I'm not going to go through all the details of all the alternatives. Sorry, Paul, it sounded like you were looking forward to that, but I'm going to give kind of a highlight of the sets and then go into the details on the committee recommendation. So 3 alternative sets in the document. Alternative set 1 is just a general rebuilding approach and some of the set-asides that get us to the quota. And most of there's a P-star option, but most of the discussion has been on either a 51% chance of rebuilding or a 60% chance of rebuilding by 2032, the current time period. And there's, when they're doing all the runs of the projections, a 50% probability means half of those runs are ending up somewhat below the target, and half of those runs are ending somewhat above the target. We would generally expect most of the runs to kind of be centered around the target, and then the shape of that certainty depends on the uncertainty of the assessment, which there is substantial in this case. Then alternative set 2 is the trip limit approach, essentially returning to the old system before we got into rebuilding, or a little bit of a slower ramp up on trip limits. And alternative set 3 were recreational possession limits, and it's 20 right now. It's not managed through the commission, but when the 20 fish limit was put in, essentially there's a lot of discussion. The public and the states that represent most of the mackerel catch, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. So it's kind of like essentially a voluntary coordinated setup right now between the federal limit and the states through a lot of discussion back and forth. So it was from 20 to 25, or the other alternative there is to have a split limit 4 that would also have 50 on 4 higher trips. And so those are the primary alternatives, and just a flashback of what kind of why we ended up with the alternatives that you see right now. We were getting a sense earlier of what the ABCs were likely going to be, and last time you met, you said, okay, this seems reasonable, and staff go try to build some of the more details based on what we get from the SSC. So that's where these came from. So unfortunately, because of the shutdown, the monitoring committee meeting happened after the committee meeting. Normally that would occur before. But I'm still going to present it first because I think it just provides good context. So the monitoring committee met just last week. It was as soon as we could get a Federal Register notice out after the FR Federal Register reopened. So the monitoring committee didn't see any major issues with what the Mackerel Squid Butterfish Committee came up with. I said, yeah, the 500 metric ton set aside for Canada is reasonable, but there's certainly uncertainty about what Canada does. We have their letter there. 2,500 metric ton set aside for recreational catch seems reasonable given recent catch and trends. If you look at, the last, 5 years, it seems like that should cover it, including for either one of the small increases that are, or the increases that are proposed in the document in the framework. We don't expect to increase catch much beyond what it's going to be, but I mean, there's a certain amount of variability, certain amount of imprecision, so that uncertainty has to be acknowledged, but we don't expect the changes proposed here to 2,500 metric tons seems reasonable to cover that. Some buffer on the commercial landing seems reasonable given it's a high volume fishery. It can be hard to close it exactly on a dime. And 610 metric tons is like 1 day from March 2024. I think it's like the highest monthly landings, and that's just what it averages out to a daily landing in that year. So the fishery can potentially land that much in a day. Maybe not be likely, but seemed like a reasonable objective way to set that buffer. It did have a few suggestions that could require a motion by the council if it wants to tweak the recommendations coming out of the committee. And Stephen, there might be someone unmuted. And so one of those is on the commercial discard set aside. It's 287 metric tons in the document. The monitoring committee is just looking at maybe including 2025, preliminary 2025 commercial discards are quite high, but they only include observer data through June. So the more that's set aside for that, the less likely an overage. The monitoring committee's charge is to try to make recommendations to avoid the specifications having overages. But it said that any of these averages, and that 285 is just a minor update for more recent data on the 23 to 24. Any of those averages seemed reasonable. And there could be some reason why discards might go back down. Well, maybe they go up if there's more mackerel in the water, but the higher trip limits proposed, that may get rid of some discards. And we have seen a bit of a bump up in regulatory caused discard reportings, not expanded data, just the raw data. In the last couple of years with the trip limits, we've seen some more reports of why the fishermen are discarding mackerel, and regulatory discard has increased. It's still mostly market driven. But then on the monitoring committee call, we got a comment, and the monitoring committee concurred that if we do get higher mackerel prices because of the European lower quotas, that may spur less that it's just it makes it more profitable to retain any mackerel that may have been discarded. So there are some kind of counter pressures why Atlantic mackerel discards may go up or down in coming years. So that was the first potential modification, but not necessary, depending on the council's preference. The second that I think the monitoring committee felt a little more strongly about was that in the document right now, in that trip limit alternative, it's like a 3-phase system. And how it was set up, given the data I had at the time, the document said, go to the first set of lower trip limits at 1,100 metric tons. It seemed like, based on 24 and 25 at the time, that would be about what 2024 and 2025 total landings were going to be, and should cover the fishery for the rest of the year. With the end of the shutdown and updating landings data, it seems now like 2025 should end up at about 1,713 metric tons. And so, again, the phase 2 and 3 trip limits, that's just what's been in place for 24 and 25. So, like, if the fishery caught the main chunk of the quota really quickly in 26, then we would just fall back to what was in place for all of 24 and 25. And so this is the 24 and 25 landings patterns, and blue is 25, and you can see we're going to end up a good bit above the quota, and the projection is that 1,713 metric tons, ending at the end of the year. So the monitoring committee said, yeah, like, we don't know when we're going to get triggered to phase 2. Maybe it's January 10th, maybe it's June 10th. If it's June 10th and you've got 1,713 metric tons left in the quota, you're probably going to leave some fish in the quota, not caught. But given how far we've run over this year, given kind of we're still in mackerel rebuilding, the monitoring committee recommended considering going to that phase 2 closure a bit earlier, leaving with some more quota remaining. So, so that was a monitoring committee recommendation that would require an amendment to the current committee recommendation for alternative set 2. The other thing that came up in some public comments that the monitoring committee briefly talked about was there has been a tier 3 7% cap on landings. You saw some public comments. Since when limited access went into place, I think it was a 2011 council action, so maybe it was 2013. It's not like a set aside for tier 3. It's not like quota that's reserved for them. It's just if they hit that portion of the total, they get shut down to a lower trip limit, 20,000 pounds. It wasn't an issue for 24 and 25 because everyone just started basically closed. So it hadn't come up in discussions and didn't come up at the committee, but it was in public comment. So I pinged Garfo about it, and obviously it would have been optimal if it had been kind of our normal process, but it wasn't normal this year. So the monitoring committee flagged that it is part of the specifications. It's been a traditional part of the mackerel spec since limited access. Tier 3 is typically caught, I looked at since maybe last 5 or 6 years, between like 100,000 and 400,000 pounds of mackerel in tier 3. So they haven't landed a lot of mackerel in typical years. That tier 3 cap has never been triggered, but it is there, and there were some public comments, so the monitoring committee just discussed it a bit. Okay, I'm going to pause for questions about those monitoring committee recommendations, and then we'll go into the committee motions. So thanks.
Thanks, Jason. I'll start with Mike Pentney.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Jason. So when the monitoring committee was, as you were describing, sort of the different projections and sort of thought experiments you were doing in terms of where the quota we might hit the quotas and the reductions would come into place, were you thinking about the timing of the framework adjustment? Because they're going to start on January 1st with the current 20,000 pound possession limit. So until we get the framework in place, we won't see any change in the possession limit. So I'm not just curious if you took that into account in terms of your thoughts in terms of when we might start hitting quotas and needing reductions.
No, not that. At the last meeting, there had been some discussion that potentially if the council wants to, it could request NIMS to do an in-season adjustment to, yeah, we would normally start the year with rollover, but there's this provision in the plan where NIMS, as long as it consults with the council, it's consulting with the council right now, NIMS can do an in-season adjustment. So theoretically, and there have been in-season adjustments in the past, NIMS could say, we're going to in-season adjust to whatever the council is recommending here, even though it's going to take 4 or 5 months to actually get it in place. So the question to Mike's first question is no. This is like based on the fishery kind of operating basically for the full year with whatever trip limit system is kind of intended.
Follow up, Mike?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Jason. And I was planning to talk about it in a potential in-season adjustment kind of after we get through the bulk of the motions. But I can just touch on that now. We are looking at doing an in-season adjustment to adjust the quota, but we're not going to be able to adjust the possession limits. And I can speak to that in more detail later if I have questions. But just wanted to just ask ESC kind of what you were thinking in terms of the timeline for the framework adjustment in terms of when some of these changes might go into effect. Thanks.
Any other questions for Jason? Not seeing any, Jason.
Yeah, I would just add, I think, with squid, mackerel, butterfish, I think over the last, couple decades, we've basically taken kind of an adaptive approach, right? When we have this new trip limit, a big change in quota, the council goes with something that seems reasonable, and then, the next year or 2 years later, we kind of keep adjusting to try to dial in. Okay. Oh.
Question from Lori.
Thank you. I just want to make sure. So basically the quote is going up, but trip limits will not be able to be changed with the in-season adjustment. So the fishery, it's a rollover of the prior trip limits are going to apply to the new quota until the framework is submitted and accepted, and then things can change.
It looks like it was directed at the RA, so go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, so that's, yeah, so getting into, I guess now we're consulting on a potential in-season adjustment. So we do have that flexibility in the regs. We've been talking about the, making sure that we try to provide as much opportunity for taking advantage of the increased quotas as possible, as soon as possible, recognizing that, as great as Jason is at turning around documents and getting them and working with our staff to get to a rulemaking, it's still going to require preparation of a document over the holidays, getting proposed rules submitted, cleared, published, final rule, submitted, cleared, published. Kind of really concerned with the process that we've had over the last year, noting that the New England Council adopted revised specifications for the Atlantic herring fishery in April, and it was December 12th before we published a final rule. So, and that was largely outside of our control. So, with concern about what the timeline might be for getting the framework adjustment approved and implemented, we wanted to try to take advantage in any way we could to provide additional fishing opportunity. We can increase the quota, and we're looking at increasing the quota, not probably to whatever the full amount that the council would adopt today, but at least one of the, lower but still a substantial increase amounts. But increasing and changing the possession limits gets very complicated because that requires a regulatory change. And most of the delays that we have seen in rulemaking over the last year have been when there's been a regulatory change, the process that occurs in headquarters and through the system. If we are just changing the quota, then we avoid a lot of the potential holdups and hangups in the process. to the point where we are looking at, early January potentially, I'll look to Maria, but of having the quota change implemented versus if we try to change the possession limits, which is a regulatory change, we would still probably be looking at several months of trying before we could get that implemented.
Jason?
So the in-season adjustment language kind of refers to the specifications in this section, which includes the trip limits. So there's no way that you can do the trip limits as part of that in-season adjustment.
I mean, we could. The problem is the possession limits are in the regulations. So in other words, we've got a potential action where all we're changing is the quota, no change to the regulations. That goes through in a matter of days. Changing the regulation to change the possession limits goes through probably a couple of months to several months process. So that's the trade-off. We're trying to get the quota increased as soon as possible. We can do that very quickly. Getting the possession limits, it's almost better for us to just work to get that framework done and implemented as soon as possible.
Jason, I don't see any other questions if you want to move on to the committee's recommendation.
Okay. So again, especially for alternative set 2, related to that monitoring committee. And so that changes things a little bit, because if the trip limits are changing, they're not going to they're not going to be able to get into that much of the higher quota quickly. And if that's the case, then probably the current set aside, I think, would be sufficient, because it's going to be much later in the year when they're able to get that. If for some miraculous way that trip limit change was pushed through faster, as maybe a 1B on the in-season adjustment, which seems very unlikely, then I think the monitoring committee's recommendation holds that going to that lower trip limit earlier. But it sounds like that may be very unlikely. Okay. So alternative set 1, which is the primary specifications. And I'm going to just flag what the committee's motion was, and then kind of a little more detail on it, and then come back, and the committee chair can make it on behalf of the committee. But this was at the committee. They recommended A4, the 51% rebuilding probability by 2032. The primary kind of, I think, what drove the discussion was that reduction in the 24 recruitment numbers already address uncertainty in a pretty precautionary fashion. So, all these alternatives say that, even if the 24 recruitment is 93% lower than the assessment estimated it to be, you'd still rebuild with you'd still have a 51% chance of being fully rebuilt by 2032. So this is the table in the document that kind of describes, with the other components from the 51% rebuilding probability. You start with the ABCs, the 500 for Canada, the 2,500 metric tons for wreck catch, the 610 metric ton commercial buffer, the discard set aside 287 metric tons, what the commercial quotas end up with for 26 and 27. So if you take that, so again, just there's like the committee recommends, so staff is just kind of wordsmith that committee recommendation into a motion for the council to consider, and I think the committee chair can make that on behalf of the committee.
Mr. Rule, whenever you're ready.
Oh, I got to reorganize. I move we adopt A4 as preferred, i.e. a 51% chance of rebuilding probability by 2032.
Thank you, Bobby. So motion on behalf of the committee does not need a second. Discussion on the motion? Lori?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, we just heard that we're in for a big increase as far as the quota goes, but the trip limits aren't going to change initially. So the industry is not going to have access to catch more fish because the trip limits aren't changing. So I think that further supports 51%. I mean, by the time they have access to catch the fish, we've lost a certain percentage of the year. I mean, 3 months, 4 months. So, I mean, that's almost another buffer in itself because they're not going to be able to go after them the way they would if trip limits were adjusted. So it just seems fair enough. I mean, this has got a lot of precaution built into it.
Okay, we have one other hand right now, Michelle Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really would like to support this motion. I appreciate all of the feedback from industry with respect to what they're seeing on the water, as well as the market opportunities given the situation over in Europe. But and I'm not going to make a substitute motion because I just don't think it would pass. I support alternative A3, which would allow for a 60% probability of rebuilding, for a few reasons. I think the letter from Canada indicates the potential for for them to adjust their quota next year. That concerns me, and so I think being a little bit more conservative at this point is needed. I also still have concerns about uncertainty in the assessment. I didn't see anything from I appreciate that the SSC took steps to adjust the estimate of recruitment, but I'm still not seeing anything from the assessment that changes the uncertainty that we're seeing in any significant way. Combined with the fact that we really have no sense of when we might be looking at a transition from the current ASAP model to WAM. And so with those retrospectives in mind, I really just can't support this type of increase at this time. I realize that this was something that we included in our response to the executive order, that we would consider something like this, but I think we have considered it, and unfortunately I won't be able to support this motion. Thank you.
Chris Batsevich.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I also cannot support this motion for the reasons that Michelle gave. This is still a pretty substantial bump over compared to what's currently in place, but there's just a lot of this uncertainty in general in this assessment, despite the adjustments the SSC made for recruitment the last couple of years. We know we're still in a rebuilding plan. We didn't make the first deadline, so we've extended it out due to uncertainty in the assessments in the past. I think taking a more measured approach, which would be alternative A3, and I also am not going to make a substitute motion. I just don't think it's going to be supported enough. But I think that would be the better route to increase our probability of actually meeting the target by 2032. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Any other discussion by council members? Bobby?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I agree in some aspects with the precautionary approach to go to a higher percentage of rebuilding, but given the lengthy conversation we had at the committee and what we just heard from the RA, that we actually have a couple extra layers of uncertainty built into it now that we weren't, or a buffer that we weren't expecting. If I understand it correctly, we can do an in-season adjustment to the overall quota, but it's going to take a couple of months at best to have any effect on possession limits. Knowing that mackerel is an early part of the year fishery, we're going to lose a big chunk of it right out of the gate. We're not going to be able to capitalize on 2026 in the traditional time frame where the at least a third, if not a higher percentage of the fishery takes place. So knowing that and understanding that we need that, we have to go through, it has to go through the machine and it has to go through the proper channels to be done, even though the time frame is going to throw us way out, we still have to have it done for next year. So I would be fine with the 51%, knowing that there's no chance we're going to hit it, that we're going to hit, any of these numbers if we lose that first quarter of the fishery or first third of the fishery, but having everything in place so next year we can, hopefully we'll have some information. We may have, some acoustic information or cooperative research, acoustic stuff to look at. We may have a mesh selectivity study that we can cite. So we may be able to tweak as we go. Plus, we should have the ability to monitor the fishery throughout the year. Utilize port side sampling and utilize. I'm sure the dealers would be more than happy to do the same as they did with squid, where they can produce the actual disposition of the fish. We can get actual fish sizes, we can get weights, so we can understand what population is being removed from that body of fish. Are we fishing on the smaller 200-gram fish, or is the bulk of what's being landed a 400, 500, 600-gram fish? Which, when you equate the size of the fish to the number of fish, that has a dramatic impact on what's being removed. But seeing as how there's a lot of fail safes already built into this, even though these numbers, 51 versus 61 is kind of a big number, knowing how it's going to play out for this year, I think it kind of negates itself. I'm in full support of the original motion.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands from council members. So before we call the question, I'd like to offer the public a chance to comment on the motion. I see a couple hands up front. I apologize. If you could introduce yourself, and then Greg, I'll go to you.
Good morning. I'm Captain Mike Piernock from Massachusetts, president of Stellwagen Bank Charter Boat Association. My comments today are on their behalf, and just to give you some details, our membership consists primarily of select captains from the for-hire fleet, as well as commercial and recreational fishers. We participated in providing DNA samples of mackerel about 2-3 years ago for the Northeast Fishery Science Center and David Richardson. And the reason why we did this, because 10 plus years ago, what used to happen is the herring would arrive in April, the mackerel would be right behind them, and then within a month, they keep going, they go north to Canada. But the last 10 years, the mackerel arrive in Western Gulf of Maine, Stellwagen, they stay there an entire season. They're now just going south now. So conditions have changed, they've shifted, and we have a tremendous biomass of all sizes. Small ones, medium ones, large ones. Naturally, the small ones are closer to shore. If we're going to get the larger ones, you're going out to Stellwagen to get them. I want to point out that the samples that we collected, the mackerel samples we collected and provided, they did the DNA on them. They were all U.S.-based DNA, no Canadian. So I'm not sure if the Canadian issue is their DNA fish that they have caught up there and over-harvested. It's not clear to me whether that's impacting our fishery. So just want to point that out. I want to point out the disconnect. One of the things we were able to find with the DNA is that we had pre and post spawning fish, not only in April, we had it April, May, June, all the way to July, and it would depend on whether they were near shore and offshore. And we found that amazing just to see that. So when the surveys are done with the bongo nets, to get that timeline where you're actually going to catch whether they're spawning and whether recruitment's occurring, that's going to be very difficult to find that, as well as to locate where the smaller fish are nearer shore and the larger fish are farther offshore, and the timing isn't corresponding to when that actually takes place. So I hope you can just take that in consideration, because our observations are inconsistent with the outcome, which We're saying it should be higher than that, but I understand the limitations, but just wanted to make sure I was able to provide those comments today. Thank you, and thank you, Jason, and the SSC for dealing with these curveballs with the government closure and just bringing this all together with this outcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And yeah, we share our appreciation for the work that was done in this. I saw one other hand in the room, Greg.
Good morning, Greg DiDomenico, Lund's Fisheries, Cape May, New Jersey. Just want to not just support this comment, but also thank you for the process that got us here. I think it was pretty plain to see the SSC deliberations provided what I think is probably enough precaution. And I think this 51% option is a good alternative. And I can tell you that we'll put every pound to it to good use. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other hands in the audience? Okay. Not seeing any, so I'll call the question. We've already heard for and against, so we're not going to be doing this the easy way. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. And online as well, sir. Sorry. Okay, that's 16. Yep, and one online. Okay, opposed? Okay, got 3. Okay, I have 16 in favor, 3 against. Any abstentions? I don't think so. I think we got all hands. Okay, and no abstentions. So the motion passes. Again, my count there is 16 in favor, 3 opposed. Jason, if you want to bring up the next, please.
Thank you. Okay, so alternative set 2, the committee recommended B3, which is the slower directed fishery limits, and primarily through a trip limit on tier 1. And the rationale was trying to balance increased access across the categories in a longer season when and where the fish show up. Just trying to advance here, hold on. And so what that looks like is that phase 1 starts off with a 200,000 pound trip limit. It's about 1.5 times the tier 2 trip limit. And then tier 2 and 3 would just go back to before we were in macro rebuilding, when we came out of limited access. Those were the trip limits that were set up, and they're really just trying to accommodate. The way it was set up was trying to accommodate when occasionally they happen upon a good body of mackerel, that they have an opportunity to make a few trips and not have regulatory discarding. Then open access, 20,000 pounds per trip. Then phases 2 and 3 are just the same as what we're at right now. So phase 2 would trigger when there's 1,100 metric tons remaining. And then, again, that's the same as the current year start. And then it'd be 20,000 pounds for limited access vessels and 5,000 pounds for open access vessels. Then phase 3 is just when 220 metric tons remains, that's just 20% of that 1,100. And again, that's the same as what happens right now when we go to the final trip limits for mackerel, 10,000 pounds and 2,500 pounds. So the motion from the committee is on the board for the committee chair. Thanks.
All right, Jason, we'll we'll give Stephen a chance so that Bobby could actually read that in and we all have it in front of us.
Steven, you want me to try to share from my computer? Oh, looks like you got it.
I move we adopt B3 as preferred, modified trip limits to allow a slower directed fishery as described in the November 2025 framework draft working document.
Okay, thank you. That's a motion on behalf of the committee. There's, okay, sorry, I was reading the comments. So we have that up before the council. There's some new elements here, right? That the trip limits will be part of the framework, and until that is passed, just want to keep that in mind when we're voting on this, that those won't kick in until the framework gets through the Federal Register. So discussion from council members, and I think I could, yeah, still have hands online as well. Okay. I'm not seeing any hands from council members. I'll quickly look to the public. Any, I do have one. Megan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Megan Lapp, Seafreeze. We support the motion and slowing down the fishery to make the quota last throughout the year. But I will also point out that we support this motion along with the council taking serious steps towards moving to implement a 3-inch minimum mesh size in this fishery. 3-inch diamond and 2 7/8 square, whatever it is for butterfish. Because I think a very good question was asked at the committee meeting. Rich actually asked, at what age do the fish recruit into this fishery? Well, without a minimum mesh size, the answer to that question is any age. And we have minimum mesh sizes for all the other fish that we manage. It's important to put one in for this fishery. There are a lot of small fish out there, which is good. That's exciting and that's good. But we want to make sure that we're able to follow that year class through the fishery for many years and not just 1 year. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. I see one other hand. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Glenn Goodwin. I'm here on behalf of just a concerned citizen, not from Seafreeze, but I was involved in the putting together with a group of incredibly capable people, putting Seafreeze together from the ground up. One of my first council meetings was tying our new boats up and going up to Portland, Maine to fight against TALF. Back in the early days of the mackerel fishing, we set up a JV that for transfer only, so that we kind of proved that we didn't need to let foreigners fish in our waters. If you look at the landings history after 1990, it went along at relatively 10 to 15,000 tons until basically I guess the agency kind of waved in a probably about a 20-fold capacity increase in the early 2000s. And we saw the ramp up in landings, and then we saw it collapse. And that's basically what we've been dealing with since then. I think this whole fishery could have been closed 10 years ago if you actually look at what was being landed and where the efforts were shifted. I'm 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 excited to see we've got a nice crop of mackerel coming along. I'm all for a mesh requirement. I thank the council for pushing the butterfish changes that we had just made. That was mostly me kind of pushing that along because I knew I had been doing it in mackerel for years when, the main component of the stock had gone down, and there was just mixing of the small fish with the bigger ones, and we would be able to sift the big fish out of the small ones. A lot of the people that were involved in the fishery weren't operating in that effect, and that kind of got us where we are today. I mean, there's a lot of gory details in how we got here, but I really would like to see a mesh requirement. I've been on the phone with Emerson Hasbrook about doing a study so we can prove it out, I guess, so he can bless it. But I'm certain it works. I've done quite a bit of it already, and I'd just like to see that part of it before we kind of unleash the hound, so to speak. If that isn't in there, I don't think that you're going to see the stock recover at all over time if we're going to let the small ones get caught up and brought in. So that's there's a funny little cartoon on the refrigerator on one of the boats. It says, when all else fails, let's try what the captain suggested. So I thought maybe that would be a good spot to try that. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Any other hands from the public? Not seeing any. Wasn't a lot of discussion at council, so I'm going to try this one the easy way. Is there any objection to the motion from the committee? Including hands online? Not seeing any. So, Jason, this motion will pass unanimously.
Okay. Okay, thank you. We may have to, or Stephen, you advancing now? Okay. Could you advance? Okay. So on the committee recommendations on set 3, the committee recommended alternative C2 is preferred, and it would increase the recreational possession limit to 25 fish, pass the committee by consent. And the rationale was to align with the increase in ABC, allows for additional harvest in an incremental fashion, and aligns with New England State's opposition to the differential trip limits. Next. So I don't have anything else in particular to add to that. So this would just be that motion, just slightly reworded for the committee chair to make. Thanks.
Go ahead, Patty.
I move we adopt C2 as preferred, increasing the recreational possession limit to 25 fish.
Okay, motion out of the committee is before the council. Any discussion? I see one hand, Mike Pentney.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I actually have a motion to substitute. See if Jason can or Stephen can pull that up.
Yeah, I'll get it in a second.
Okay. While he's doing that, I'll go ahead and read it if that's okay.
Yes.
So I move to adopt. This is a motion to substitute. I move to adopt alternative C3, increased and differential federal possession limits, 25 fish for private boats and 50 fish for for-hire patrons as the council's preferred alternative for mackerel recreational possession limits. And if I get a second, I'll mention my.
I see a second Anna Beckman. So I will look to the maker and then I'll give you a chance if you have rationale as well. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks. So, I mean, recognizing that, this was discussed by the committee, but I also, looking at the numbers, looking at the comment letters that we've received from several groups of for-hire captains, I believe that selecting alternative C3 would have marginal increase in total recreational catch. I calculated something on the order of 2.5% to 4% increase, but would still provide economic relief to the for-hire sector and increase access to the resource for anglers who rely on for-hire sector for access to their fishing opportunities.
Anna as the seconder.
Thank you. And I also agree with Mike's points, but having looked through the comment letters, the Stellwagen Bank Charter Association, the Cape Cod Fishermen's Association did state quite a few valid concerns for consideration, including that option C3 is consistent with National Standard 4 with bag limits and that are fair and equitable and consistent with National Standard 8 that considers the need for the for-hire fleet to operate in a financially viable business and provide recreational anglers across the fishery via the for-hire fleet for those that are on the lower economic scale and cannot afford their own boats. And as we continue to discuss mode management, this is an excellent example of where, the fleet is coming in and requesting some consideration. It's clearly within our ability and purview to offer this. There's not a resource concern, and it is a path that we should be considering on a regular basis. Certainly, the for-hire fleet represents a small percentage of the recreational catch, and they have all the mandatory reporting for the fish caught through the EVTR. So they do have some accountability, and I very much support the substitute motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna. So the substitute motion is now up, and I will look to council members for comments on the sub. I see Greg Hewitt.
Mike, thanks. I was going to make a motion for that. I think it's very well. I actually read the letters too, Anna, that you talked about and Mike talked about, and supporting the group and supporting the fishery itself and the expense that they have and everything. And also just being able to, they catch smaller fish, to be honest with you, to take a bigger, be able to take more of them home and paying for something that they're getting for as well. I do feel that this is a move in the right direction, mode management, and also, as we talk about sector separation as well. So I just want to thank you and Anna for putting this forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Greg. I see Michelle Duval's hand. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is really more of a question, I also read the letters and, when we first discussed recreational trip limits a couple of years ago, the discussion centered around the fact that, most of the recreational catch was taking place in state waters. Certainly we've received a letter from Maine, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire about their preference to have, the same 25 fish bag limit across all modes. And so I guess I'm curious, I'm not sure I would expect those states to, complement this in their state waters, and just curious how that might work out. Thanks.
Okay, Michelle, thanks. I'm not sure who the question's going to, but I'll look to Jason.
Yeah, I think since folks have to traverse state waters to get home, that if the states don't change their regs, you'd effectively be limited to whatever your state's regs that you're returning to or going through their waters, one or the other or both. So then it will just be up to the states to decide, what they think is reasonable and appropriate. And then if they match the council, then their states would be that. If they don't, then it would effectively limit folks in their states to whatever they considered at 5 or 25 or 100. If in state waters, there's, the state rules apply unless you have a federal permit. So, yeah, so if the states don't change, then folks would be effectively limited to the state's limits, I think.
All right, thank you for fielding that for us, Jason. Chris Petzo.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm a little concerned about potentially having different possession limits in federal waters versus state waters. And I think it depends on the state as far as how that is handled. In North Carolina, if there was more or less restrictive measures in federal waters, once they came into state waters, they'd be bound to the state waters regulations, as Jason mentioned. But I don't know if every state operates that way. So it does create some enforcement concerns, as we saw in the joint letter from the northern New England states. I'll say that I do sometimes support mode specific management measures such as this. What's giving me pause here is the disconnect that we could see between state and federal waters in the regulations, the enforcement challenges that'll bring, and also just kind of create some additional uncertainty in the MRIP estimates, which I think already stated are somewhat uncertain already. So just wanted to put those out on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So last call for council discussion before I go to the public. No hands. Okay. Do any members of the public want to comment? I do see one hand, Mike, if you want to come up. Oh, and another Mike. Mike Wayne will go after Mike there.
Mike Piernock, President, Telwagon Bank Charter Boat Association. My comments today are on their behalf, and I thank the maker and the seconder of the motion. Your rationale is right on. We do have somewhat of a curveball here of if we are multi-species permitted vessels, and now if we're going to have a more, if the state bag limit is different, then we have to go by the more stringent bag limit. But I want to note from an enforcement standpoint that the EPOs that are in our state, they see the name of our boat, they bring it right up, they can see all the EVTRs that we filled out and see that we're permitted. In addition, the state of Massachusetts, for example, requires that we register with them. We're Coast Guard, we go provide a Coast Guard license, and then we get a label or a seal that we put in the front of the boat that identifies us as a for-hire vessel. So I point that out from an enforcement standpoint. It can be enforced. So I would hope that the states would, accommodate and make the bag limit reflect that. One thing I do want to note, though, that before, when there was no bag limit, we were concerned that the 20 wasn't going to do it for that segment of the population that catch mackerel and eat it. And it didn't. And we lost those for-hire trips, and we hope to get them back. Now to note, that segment of the population are typically the have-nots, and they're at the lower economic scale. And 50 does it for them. They will come back with that and pay for such. I appreciate the points that were made by Ms. Beckwith about National Standard 4 and National Standard 8, but we must also look at the fact with National Standard 8, because what we have here is we have a private shoreside angler that cannot afford their own vessel. And with increased temperatures and shifting stocks, they typically can't get access to mackerel or other species. So how can they get access to that other than going on a 6-pack vessel or a party boat, headboat vessel? So, we're the bus that provides access to the recreational anglers to the fishery. So without that, they don't get access, and economically they can't pull it off, so they can't afford a boat. So I wanted to point that out also with National Standard 8 and how that impacts that shoreside private angler, which is one of the have-nots. Lastly, and I thank you for letting me speak today. I mean, me and Willie, he's coming up next. We drove 8 hours yesterday. You all know, driving through the Northeast, somehow we missed that traffic in New York City. 8 hours, 500 miles. And I hope that demonstrates the importance of this. And there's a few other items on the agenda today and tomorrow that we're going to provide comment on. But I thank you for the time. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw Mike Wayne.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike Wayne with American Sport Fishing Association. I feel like I have a lot of comments on this, but I'm just going to focus on taking a bigger picture perspective here. This afternoon, we're going to have a discussion at the Council and Commission joint session on sector separation. And it just appears as though there's a lot of mode management currently occurring across all of our fisheries right now that isn't in need of an amendment or change to the FMPs to accomplish it. And so with a motion on the board right here that adds another fishery with mode management between the private angler and the for hire group without any changes through the sector separation amendment, I'm now wondering, do we even need that action? What is that adding? The council is clearly very comfortable making changes like this without it. And so I'll be interested to hear this afternoon kind of what is it that we're doing? Because it looks like we're already doing it. I think the other thing that I wanted to say is I continue to hear that the catch accounting is actually a very important aspect of this. Anna mentioned that in our comments. I heard others highlight that. And so I'm just wondering, should the council be shifting focus more to catch accounting as the sole justification for a lot of these actions to provide additional fishing access because of difference in how the catch is accounted for? So just some comments to think about as we move through the agenda and talk sector separation this afternoon. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Jason, do you have a comment to that? And then I'll go.
Yeah, just a thought. I think there is some uniqueness of this in terms of between commercial and recreational here with Atlantic mackerel. And the for hire component is a tiny part of total catch and a very small part of recreational catch. On the accounting side of things that the state's mentioned, I don't think this dual mode will affect the precision of the overall estimates. It may affect the precision of the for hire estimate because there may be some more variability in there, but we're not trying to limit the for hire to a specific amount. So we're actually not trying to do accounting by mode here. I think if we were, that would be a more it might be a bigger thing because yes, with the higher trip limit, you get some more variable catches. The precision might go down on the for hire component, but we're not trying to monitor it since it's such a small component of the rec catch. So there may be some kind of peculiar situations with mackerel here that that may or may not make it kind of a unique situation. Thanks.
Thanks, Jason. I have one more hand from the audience. If you could come up, sir. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you. My name's Willie Hatch, Cape Cod Charter Boat Association. Thank you for your consideration to provide relief to the for hire fleet. When we were reduced to 20 mackerel a guy, that was pretty much the end of the mackerel charters for us. So going to 50 fish is going to help us out. Like Jason said, it's such a small part of the overall quota. You know, we're talking 50 fish a guy, 4 or 5 fish a pound. It's 10, 12 pounds a guy. It's going to be such a small impact to overall landings. We look at some of the commercial landings of, hundreds of thousands of pounds. And we appreciate the mode management, and we do fill out VTRs. So as far as using the data from that'll kind of tighten up the catches. But I just wanted to thank you guys again for your consideration for this. Thanks.
Thank you, Willie. Appreciate it. I'd like to bring it back to the council now. I'll call the question on the substitute. If we could do like we did last time. So if you're in the room, go ahead and raise your hand in the room, and then we'll look to our three council members that are online to raise their hands virtually. So all of those in favor of the substitute, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 17 hands. All those opposed? I see 3. Okay. So any abstentions? No, it's okay. So Jason, I have a count of 17 in favor with 3 opposed, making the substitute now the main motion. Is there any further discussion from the council on this? I'm not going to take it back out to the public. But I would like to preserve if folks would like to keep their objections. So with that, sorry, Stephen, if we can get that to just read as the main motion now.
Even if you go up or down one, I think you'll get it. Maybe other way. It just hasn't updated yet. Just go forward one. There we go.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so alternative C3 is now the main motion. And I'll go ahead and read that. It's increased in differential federal possession limits of 25 fish for private boats and 50 fish for 4 hire patrons as the council's preferred alternative. So again, I apologize, but show of hands, those in favor. Count, and those opposed. Very good. Let's leave that on. We have 17 in favor and 3 opposed to the motion. So that motion passes. Jason? And back to you.
Thank you. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. Is that the Stephen, just go back one, just double check that. Okay, then forward one. Thanks. Okay. So the river herring and shad cap is a component of the specifications. It doesn't have to be kind of set. It rolls over if it's not changed, but the council needs to kind of consider whether it wants to change it or not. There were no river herring and shad committee motions were made to modify the river herring and shad cap, recommending that the council do that. So no motion is necessary to maintain the same cap here. It would roll over at 129 metric tons. But again, the council kind of just needs to consider the issue and just have it on the record that there's no changes requested or adopted, recommended.
Great, thank you, Jason. So with that, I'm going to open the floor to council members. Is there any further discussion on the river herring and shad cap? I do see one hand. Michelle Duvall, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess, we've discussed this a number of times, and I guess maybe just a quick question for Garfo. I know some of our previous discussions have focused on the agency's ability to monitor this cap. Should it be lowered from the current 129 metric tons? And I just wondered if perhaps Mike Petney could provide some comment on that, or one of his staff. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, so I think hopefully everybody understands that because we're very limited on observer coverage, we're extrapolating from very, very limited, a handful of observed trips at best each year. So the smaller the cap, the harder it is to manage against that. and the less certain we are that we're achieving it before we, would apply any measures on the fishery. So, we support maintaining the caps as where they are, and certainly would encourage the council to continue to work with us in the center on how we might enhance observer coverage so that we would have more confidence in the data and have more data to work with on this.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from council on the cap? I'm not seeing any, Jason, so I think that gets to the will of the council here.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. So we had a letter a while back from the agency that when a few specification cycles ago, we changed from a formal allocation between rec and commercial to back to how it used to be 10 or 15 years ago of just a deduction for expected recreational catch. In some places in the regs that was updated, and in some places it wasn't. So there's some outdated reg language. Nothing has happened that shouldn't have happened or shouldn't have happened that did happen. But it needs to, but there's some reg language just to align the reg text to what the council has previously adopted and adopted today, to just do a set aside for recreational catch and just keep evaluating as things go. So no action is needed here. The council will get deeming regulations in that council leadership reviews, then deems them as necessary or appropriate. So mostly just like flagging that that's going to occur. Again, if that wasn't your all's intent to have the recreational deduction, as you said today, then someone could raise that as an issue. Otherwise, I'll continue to the last slide, maybe. So yeah, I think all that remains now is a motion that would need a second to submit the framework to NIMS for approval and rulemaking, and then any additional feedback you have for Garfo NIMS regional administrator on a potential in-season adjustment. I think it's been discussed a bit, but it would be just good maybe to get it clear on the record of what the council hopes the regional administrator does in early 2026 vis-a-vis the mackerel quota. Thanks.
Okay, so perhaps we could do that in one, Jason, but so we are looking for comments on in-season adjustment, and I'll be looking for hands on the move to submit. So I guess if that can be done in one, raise your hand. If not, if there are folks that want to make comments on the in-season adjustment, I'll allow that time. Oh, yes, sorry, let's take a step back. Mike Pentney, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So just having a sidebar, Jason, I think you mentioned something about a tier 3 cap that came up after the committee meeting. So can you just clarify that if there's no further action on this framework by the council today, then there is no tier 3 cap? And is that consistent with your understanding and what we're trying to accomplish today?
Yeah, first, in terms of this, I'd recommend just 2 separate motions with submission and any discussion on in-season adjustment. Yeah, I think given where things stand now, how things were discussed at the committee, the trip limits would just be as they are with not a tier 3 cap. Because I think that would reflect probably what the public understood, at least at the committee level, when that came forward. And there's discussion of it since at the monitoring committee meeting, in the briefing materials. So I think the council can do that. But I think what the committee voted on was really not including a cap for tier 3. So I think, and what the So what the public understood at the time the committee voted, I don't think there was a cap really considered. So I would say, maybe the council needs to clarify that one way or the other, but that's kind of my understanding, that if the council wants a cap on tier 3, it should probably kind of state that separately and distinctly.
Okay, yeah, no, I appreciate the discussion. I think post-committee meeting and then right up into this meeting, I may have had a little misunderstanding on that myself. So then regarding the tier 3 cap, is there any discussion from council members, I guess one way or the other on? All right, I'm not seeing any there, Jason, so. I guess I'll go back again on, go ahead, Jason.
And it's part of the specification, so the council could utilize that in the next set of mackerel specifications if it wanted to.
Apologies there. I wanted to make note of what Jason just said. Thank you. So I'm looking well, let's move the submittal of the framework off the table. So can I, hands for a motion to submit this framework to NIMS? I see Bobby Rule, Jim, second. Okay. Any discussion on that? Not seeing any hands online, not seeing any hands in the room from council members. Any objection to the submittal? Not seeing any abstentions? Garfo? Okay, so Jason, that'll pass by sorry. Yes, okay. So that motion was made by Bobby Rule with a second by Jim Gilmore.
All right.
And that passed by consent with one abstention from the service. Thank you. Okay. So I will look to I guess recommendations on season adjustment. Mike Penny.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And just as we already sort of discussed, we have some concern, as I'm sure a lot of people do, that until this framework adjustment is implemented, we would be dealing with rollover specs of the 2025 level, which is like 1.9 million pounds total. Even if the possession limits are at the current levels, 20,000 pounds, that's 76 trips before we would enact, the possession limit restriction or reduction at 80% of that quota. So to just provide some, given the decisions of the council today and the new perspective we have on the stock, the resource availability, we are looking, as we have authority under the regs, to do an in-season action, as I mentioned, at least to increase the quota and avoid any concern that, with a few dozen trips that we would be looking at a further possession limit restriction or reduction, and then, constraining the fishery until we get the specs in place. As I mentioned, while we would like to also increase the possession limits, that would require a regulatory change. Changing the regulation to increase the possession limit would mean we have to prepare a regulatory impact review. That would then have to go to the Office of Management and Budget to make a significance determination on that action. I mentioned the herring rule from last year, which I feel like I have a little bit of PTSD about. That rule had one regulatory change to modify slightly the New Brunswick weir fishery threshold from, I think, 2,200 metric tons to 2,600 metric tons. That sat waiting a significance determination from August until December. So that's why we're concerned about putting a possession limit restrict or change in the in-season adjustment. As I said, changing just the quota avoids all of that, allows us to get a notice action that would be in place. We're targeting very early December or January, sorry, or certainly by mid-January. And then we will work, once that's out of the way, we will work as expeditiously as possible with Jason to get the framework adjustment developed, and hopefully through a quicker rulemaking process than we saw with the herring action. The regulations that authorize us to do this in-season action do require that we consult with the council. So I feel like we're doing that right now. So I certainly appreciate any thoughts, perspectives, concerns, comments from the council. And then we will take those into consideration as we make our decision moving forward on the in-season adjustment. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. So it doesn't sound like we're looking for a motion. I think the service has made clear their intention. So unless there's a objection by council members or any further discussion, as Mike has said, we would look to that. Jason?
I guess it would be just be clarifying if the council would like that only related to the quota, or just to implementing the framework through in-season adjustment as soon as possible to, as is feasible. And if the only thing that's feasible is the quota side of things, so be it. But if any other avenues happen to present themselves, I don't know if the council wants to limit itself to, only do that with the quota. So that's just my only thought there.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jason. That's I don't know that we need a motion. If we did, I would probably look to like a former longstanding chair that would try and craft something like that. But again, if the council has no objection, and we can clearly state that whatever elements of the framework may be moved forward as quickly as possible through in-season adjustments, that would be what we're supporting. I'm seeing nods around the table, so I think we could go with that. What else do we have, Jason?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We're doing pretty well on time. We booked Jason for the morning. Yeah, let's take a quick break. We'll do a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and cover the Dogfish framework. Thank you.
That's good, thank you. What is Mike's perception? Probably the change would be on the same schedule.
Yeah.
Okay.
A typical process.
Yeah.
May, June, moving along as fast as I can.
Sure, okay, but that's the same process. Probably not changes to the forwards.
Yesterday for Jason.
I don't understand individual. I don't. No, but it's a process. It's on the same frame. That's all I want to know.
Someone is able to convince administration.
Yeah, but it's still that on that same it's on process just right now.
Yeah, that was.
Probably not. But you never know. There's some connection. Very short change.
Yeah.
The dog isn't.
Relative.
This is a 1-minute warning. If folks can make their way back to the table, please. All right, folks, for those in the back of the room, okay, I'm not sure what they're putting in that coffee, but it's an entirely different crowd than 9 a.m., I'll tell you that. Okay, so we are back from break. The council will reconvene here. I will turn it over to Jason to go over our next agenda item, the Spiny Dogfish Framework.
Thank you. So this action, the council took final action at the last council meeting, but it's a joint plan. So the two councils have to align in their recommendations on an amendment or framework like this. For specifications alone, there are some provisions where if the two councils do different things, NIMS has some flexibility to deal with that. But for a framework, they have to agree. So the main thing here is review New England's final action and decide on the MID's response. So just recapping the specifications, New England aligned on these, so there's an issue, but it sets aside slightly more discards for 2026 and 7 versus 2025, but it's just a very small adjustment, so the quotas are nearly the same. just a sense of how this year is performing relative to those specifications. Last year in the last fishing year, they got fairly close to what the current quota is. We're tracking about 2 weeks, kind of behind last year, but kind of fairly similar pattern. So again, the specifications the council's aligned on. The other framework alternatives were modifications to accountability measures. Right now, there's 100% payback of any annual catch limit overages. And if that happens, there's probably a quota reduction. We have had that in the past. So we're trying to avoid disruption of the fishery from accountability measure paybacks that don't seem necessary to keep the stock near the target, since that's the main idea. So the regional administrator at the mid-October meeting expressed concern that the kind of whole suite of package, the suite of alternatives may create a situation with kind of reoccurring overages. But at New England, he identified kind of 2 that in particular, when combined, seemed problematic. So first was from alternative set 2. And I just would say that all catch sources are treated the same for ACL overages. And at the mid, the point was that if you have a 100 metric ton discard overage or 100 metric tons landings overage, has the same impact on the stock. Even though, the discards really may be higher or lower, that's still our point estimate, our best estimate of what they are. So when you combine that with set 5, which would allow closing the fishery at 105% of the quota. And that was designed if there's a situation where like the northern states run over their quota and federal waters close early, it could potentially disadvantage Maryland and Virginia. So allow a little higher closure than the quota to kind of soak up some of that overage. And it would only be in effect if biomass was at least 50% of the target. And the council said, okay, allow it and do it for 26 and 27. And so the agency said those 2 things combined, including all the other components of some of the AM flexibility, could get in this feedback loop of just having repeated overages that are not corrected, and was pretty clear at New England that may create approvability problems. So New England's approach to kind of address this was to drop the 105% closure provision and just go with no action for set 5. So the federal waters would just close at 100% like they do now. So the mid either has to match New England's no action for that, or pursue further framework refinement, kick it back to the committee or something like that. Staff recommendation, while the mid's approach still seems reasonable to staff, the framework minus that alternative should still add substantial stability to this fishery, and to go to align with New England and submit the action for approval by NIMS with no action on alternative set 5. So had some just back and forth with NOAA General Counsel on like what's the process for doing that exactly. And they suggested if the council wants to go in that direction, to consider these 3 motions in sequence. And again, from where we are right now, and given the benefits to the fishery of getting the framework with everything else in place, staff that's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Jason. Look to the council. Jason's put forward some motions based on the staff recommendation. But I guess first, are there any questions on what Jason just laid out from where we were when we moved this forward to responding to New England's action? Okay, no questions. So anyone interested right now in taking up staff recommendation as a motion? Joe Grist? Yeah, please.
I move to rescind our October 2025 motion that adopted alternative 5A and would set a 5% buffer for the 2026-2027 specifications.
Thank you, Joe. Is there a second to that motion? I see Lori Nolan. Joe, any justification, or do you think Jason covered that?
I feel like Jason covered it. Between that and the materials, I think it's been covered.
Okay, thank you. Lori, yep, I'm seeing a head nod. So we have a motion with a maker and second. Jason, do you want to handle these one at a time? We'll go through.
I think, yes,
Yeah.
one at a time. It may be movable by consent, but yes, I think it's good to just go sequentially.
Very good. Any discussion on this? Sorry if I already asked that. Not seeing any. Any objection to this motion? Abstentions? Okay, we'll consider that passed by unanimous consent, Jason. If someone can, thanks, Joe.
All right. I move to adopt no action for alternative set 5, so closures would still occur at 100% of the quota.
Motion by Joe Grist. Do I have a second? Lori Nolan. Discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. Any objection to the motion? Abstentions? Nope. Passed by unanimous consent, Jason.
I move to submit this Spiny Dogfish framework to the National Marine Fisheries Service.
Second by Lori Nolan. Discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. Any objection to this motion? Not seeing any. Abstentions? 1 from the service. Jason, motion passes by consent. Abstention from Marine Fisheries Service. Okay, so hopefully now we have submittal on Spiny Dogfish. Jason, is there anything else for us on this?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. We are a bit early, so we still intend to do the photo before we lose everyone walking off for lunch here. So with that, we will be adjourned for. Sorry, I see a hand from. Go ahead.
Hi. Thank you. Sonia Fordham, Shark Advocates International. Sorry, I just walked in the door, so I guess I missed it all. But I just had one general comment since you're in my hometown. I just wanted to take the opportunity to say what I've said at other comment periods, and just voice a general concern about the sort of eroding of the precautionary buffers for this fishery and the elements that have really led to particularly successful shark management situation if you look globally. So it's done well, but I'm concerned that the precautionary buffers are stage by stage being eroded away, and particularly bothered by the abandoning of your risk policy to set the quota much higher than the scientists initially suggested. And that seems, as far as I can tell, to be solely on industry demand. So that's, in my perception, quite problematic. And I would urge the council to take a precautionary approach in all its management decisions, but particularly for an animal that's pregnant for 2 years and that the fishery is targeting pregnant females. I think things can go awry pretty quickly. So sorry to come in at the tail end of this, but I'm just hopeful that in your next steps, you'll resume your risk policy and provide a more precautionary buffer, particularly for this shark. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Fordham, for your comments. Jason?
Sure, and thanks. And just just a refresher on like where the council ended up. And I had the quote up there. The council had requested its SSC to return an ABC equal to the OFL, kind of suspending the risk policy. And so the SSC returned that ABC. They returned what the P-star would be, but they also indicated that an alternative approach would be kind of something in the middle. And that's what the council ultimately went for. I think the predicted probability of overfishing on P-star was 46%. The 50% is what it is. And this quota is right in the middle. So it should be about 48% chance of overfishing. So it's and in terms of the impact on catches are relatively small. So the council ended up not going up to that, kind of not going with the risk policy at all. And it did end up taking the SSC's advice of that kind of middle ground approach for this specification cycle. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. Yeah, obviously we moved quickly through that. As Joe Grist mentioned in making the motions, a lot of this was, a lot of the reason why we were moving quickly was kind of covered in the material as we wanted to get this forward. But I appreciate the comments from the public and Jason for you laying out what ended up happening through the SSC process that we used there. So with that, again, the council will break for lunch. Chris, do you have some comments? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So before you scoot out for lunch, we're going to do the council photo. If you have been in the hotel, you know that there's a staircase to like this way over to my left that takes you downstairs. So meet at the top of the staircase if you're a council member. Right next to it is like a stage, some more stairs. I think will be perfect for the photo. So Mary will be there to direct you. But if everyone could make their way to that location as soon as possible, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sorry, we're running ahead.
Just